Welcome to Tech Convo. Today we are going to talk about pivot tables. In Microsoft Excel, pivot tables are an easy and interesting way to do some pretty amazing analysis very quickly. In this video, I'm going to show you how easy it is to create pivot tables, and be sure to watch till the end of the video, where I will cover some common mistakes people make that leads them to believe pivot tables are challenging to work with. If you're new to Excel, check out my Excel playlist above and in the description, where I have covered Excel from basics to advanced levels. Now, why do you need to use a pivot table? Or why do you need to learn how to create a pivot table? It's because a pivot table is an interactive way to quickly summarize large amounts of data. You can use this pivot table to analyze numerical data in detail and answer unanticipated questions about your data. You can use it in querying large amount of data in a user-friendly way. You can aggregate and subtotal numeric data, summarize them by categories and subcategories. You can expand and collapse levels of data. You can move rows to column and columns to rows. You can filter, sort, group, and conditionally format the most useful and interesting subset of data, which will enable you to focus on just the information you want. I'm going to open up Microsoft Excel, and the version that I have is Microsoft 365. But if you have a 2019, 16, 13, you should be able to follow along with this tutorial without any problems. Now I'm using a car sales example here with columns such as the make of the car, the model, the year, engine horsepower, transmission type, vehicle size, vehicle style, highway kilometer per liter, city kilometer per liter, list price, and the selling price. So column A to column K has our data, and we'll work with this data to create our pivot table. Even though this is a small data set, keep in mind that pivot tables will work on thousands of rows and thousands of columns. And one good practice to follow before creating pivot tables is to format your data into a table format. So I'll select my data table, go to Format as Table, and select one of these options. I'll go with, let's say, this one. Click OK. And my data table is now in a table format. And you can see the whole table is given a table name. It's called Table 1. Formatting your data set into a table format helps you later on when you add more data to your data set. You won't have to refresh the data source of your pivot table again and again. Now, once our data is set up, let's go and insert a pivot table. Click anywhere on the table, go to Insert, and select Pivot Table. Before that, I want to quickly show you this option called Recommended Pivot Tables. Let me click on that, and Excel automatically looks at our data table and gives a recommendation of some tables, such as the sum of the list price, sum of the selling price, and so on. This can be a good starting point if you are new to the data set and you want to quickly view some summaries of your data. I'm going to click Cancel and go to Pivot Table, click on that. Now Excel is asking me to select the range of the data. By default, Excel has selected the whole data set, Table 1, which is the name of our table. Now the next option is choose where you want to place your pivot table report, new worksheet or the existing worksheet. If you want your pivot table in a new worksheet, select this. Or if you want your pivot table to be shown side by side with your data, select existing worksheet. And for location, select some cells like this and hit OK. For now, I want my pivot table in a new worksheet. So I'll select new worksheet and hit OK. And Excel automatically creates a new sheet with a template of a pivot table and the pivot fields on the right. Now, this is where you will create and modify your pivot table. You have all the column headers over here to work with. And this area has four parts: the filters, columns of your pivot table, rows in your pivot table, and the values that you want to calculate. Now let's try to build a sample pivot table and see how to create pivot tables from scratch. Now, let's say I want to see the type of vehicles that I have and count them in our list. I'll select vehicle style and drag it to the rows area. And as you can see, Excel has automatically pulled in all available vehicle styles as rows. And to get the count for these vehicle style, all I have to do is pull one of the fields, so let's say make, into the values area. And Excel has automatically added a column for count of make. So in total, we have 29 cars, and the count for each vehicle style is against it. I can also sort this, so right click anywhere on the column, go to sort from largest to smallest, and there you have it. We have 8 sedans, 6 4-door hatchbacks, 4 SUVs, and so on. Now let's say I want to know the transmission type for each of these vehicle styles. Click transmission type and drag it to the rows. And as soon as I do that, Excel will create sub-rows for each vehicle style and give their counts. So a sedan, which is 8 in total, has 2 manual and 6 automatic cars, and so on. Now let's say I want to remove transmission type from our table. I can either click on this option for each of the vehicle style. I can right click, go to expand collapse, and say collapse entire field. Or I can go to the pivot table builder and click on transmission type and drag it off. I can also add more columns to my pivot table. Let's say I want to know the average highway kilometer per liter. So I'll select this field and drag it to the values. And as soon as I do that, you can see that Excel calculates the sum of highway kilometers for each style. We don't want the sum, we want the average. So I'll click on this little drop down arrow, go to value field settings, and over here I can select the type of calculation that I want to use to summarize my data. So I have sum, count, average, min, max, product, standard deviation, variance, etc. I'll select average and click OK. Let me format it a bit. I also want to know the selling price of each of these vehicle types. So I'll select selling price and drag it to the values area. And again, I'll change the type of calculation from sum to average. Let me format this one. And that's my average selling price of each of these vehicle types. As you can see, the SUV has the highest average selling price. Now let's say I want to know the average profit made by each of these vehicle types. For that, I know I have selling price and the list price. And what I would like to do is create a pivot column that would calculate the profit for me. So I'll go to pivot table analyze. Under calculations group, go to fields, items and sets. Select calculated field. The name of the field, I'm going to keep it as profit. I'll create a formula based on the fields that I already have. So selling price, insert, minus the list price, insert, and hit OK. And Excel has automatically placed a column called sum of profits. And as you can see, over here in the pivot table fields, there is a new field called profits. And in the values section, I can see sum of profits. So that means 8 sedans have contributed to a total of $7,465 as profits. Now let's say I want to add some filters to my pivot table. So I'll go to the list of fields. Let's say I want to select transmission type as a filter. I'll click and drag to the filters area. And over here, I can select the type of transmission. Let's say automatic only. And now you have the count of all automatic cars. The next topic we'll see is the pivot table charts. So click anywhere on your pivot table, go to pivot table analyze. Under tools, go to pivot chart, and the insert chart pop-up will have all the types of charts that can be applied to your pivot table. So I'm going to select the recommended column chart, click OK. And our pivot table has been converted into a chart. And this chart is an interactive chart where you can select the data items that you want to show in your chart. For example, vehicle styles. You can select or deselect the rows which you want to show or not show. If you just want to show the sum of profits for each vehicle type, you can remove the other columns by clicking on this label and removing field. Now I can see the sum of profits for each vehicle type. I can also play with the filters over here. You can also modify the content of your chart from the pivot charts field area. As you can see, the columns and rows have been replaced by legends and axis categories, and you can add various fields to your chart. For example, I can pull in selling price into the values and move around their positions. Now it's time to look at some common errors or mistakes people make when they are dealing with pivot tables. For that, I've removed my table formatting from my data set, so there is no table format over here. And to give you an example, let me just delete one of the column headers. Suppose this is the data set that you have and it's missing a column. When you try to enter a pivot table, it will give you an error. Excel says that the pivot table field name is not valid. That's because there is a field name missing or a column label missing. You can go back and enter the column name. One more possible error that you might encounter with pivot tables is when you add new data to the table. For example, with this data table, I have created a pivot table with the following information. I have the vehicle types in the rows and the count of each vehicle types, which is 29. And let's say I want to add a row to my data table. I've added a new record to my data table in row 31. Now, if I go back to my pivot table and try to refresh my table by going into the pivot table analyze tab, clicking on refresh, and I see that the count is still 29 instead of 30. This is because my pivot table data range is still referring to the 29 data rows in the data table instead of counting one more row which I just added to the data table. So to account for this type of changes, what you need to do is go to change data source and update the table range. Now you have 30 as your count, but this could have been avoided if initially the data table was formatted in a table format. Like we did in the beginning of this video. So that's all for today's video. And if you liked it, click on the like button. And if you have any questions, leave a comment down below. And please make sure to subscribe the channel to see more contents like this.